Hello, I'm Adam Wren,
And I'm Zack Stanton. It's Wednesday, July 30th.
and this is the Playbook Podcast. As you can hear, I have our own Playbook editor, Zack Stanton, joining me on the podcast today.
So good to be here, Adam.
Good to be with a fellow Midwesterner, always. And without further ado, here's what's driving the day. The big story today is the mid-cycle redistricting battle that we're seeing play out both in DC and in state capitals across the country. Zack, it's 2025. We're just only halfway through the redistricting process. We don't have another census until 2030. Still, the White House is really pushing red states to give this a look now ahead of the 2026 midterms. What do you think of the White House's calculus here?
It seems that they're looking at historical reality, which is that midterms tend to go fairly poorly for the incumbent party. And right now, Republicans have a House majority, but a very narrow one. And the White House wants to keep that majority. So their thinking is that if they can go to a few different Republican states and pressure those state legislators and governors to maybe squeeze a couple more Republican seats out of their map to redraw, to gerrymander, that they can pad the House majority and in the process make it a more secure final 2 years of Trump's second term. Now, the tricky thing here is that in many of these states, there's not that much left to squeeze out without potentially endangering some incumbent Republicans, because to redraw these maps in ways that favor the GOP, they need to dilute the number of Republican voters in an existing district and redraw some of those voters into new seats. And that could mean that in a big wave election, those incumbents are at risk of getting wiped out because their districts would be more competitive than they might otherwise be. So it's sort of a pigs get fat, but hogs get slaughtered type situation. And that's why in some of these states, if you talk to Republican House members about this, they're not wild about the idea, which really speaks to Trump's influence when these state legislators and governors are pursuing this, sometimes despite the wishes of their home state delegations.
Yeah, I think that's a bizarre situation. And, it's all going to come to a head later today in Austin, Texas, where House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is on the ground. He's going to be meeting with state Democratic lawmakers. One of them is State Rep James Tallarico, who we speak with in this morning's playbook. He's obviously looking at a run for Senate, fresh off of his well-received appearance on the Joe Rogan show. And he actually is authoring a bill that would require an independent commission to redistrict Texas, which is fascinating here. And the other sort of variable happening in this situation is that Texas state Democrats could avoid a quorum and they could flee the state, similar to what they did a few years back. So that's something that we're watching too.
You have to play with the hand that you're dealt, and they don't have too many options at their disposal here. The best one, as you say, is to perhaps have the Democrats deny the state legislature a quorum and perhaps go to a state like California or wherever they end up. But it's a bizarre situation in a variety of ways, because it's now prompting Democrats in some blue states to look into what, if anything, they can do in their own states to draw new Democratic gerrymanders in response. And I know that you've been digging into how that looks, how realistic that is in some of the bigger, bluer states like California, New York, New Jersey. I'm curious, Adam, what you're hearing about that.
Yeah, so Politico has reporters in bureaus across a number of these important states. And so I checked in with our folks on the ground there. We talked to Jeremy White of our California bureau and did a threat level analysis. But Governor Gavin Newsom is really serious. But California is really threatening to do this. There's a political benefit, an upside for Gavin Newsom as he considers 2028. You look at Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis there is looking at this. And Gary Fineout, our reporter in Tallahassee, tells us this quote could be worth the squeeze.
That's, of course, a Republican state.
That's right. Yeah. And then another Republican state, Indiana, there is some White House trial balloon looking at whether Indiana, which is already redistricted like other states in 2021, whether they would do this early. And I checked in with a number of Republicans close to the process, and they essentially say there's, quote, no appetite for that here. Now, of course, Trump could always start tweeting about the Indiana Speaker of the House tomorrow and make this happen, but very, very little appetite appetite in Indiana. New York, you are going to see Jeffries and Governor Kathy Hochul really try to push this, but our reporter Nick Reisman on the ground says it's just as likely as the Jets winning the Super Bowl, which does not sound promising. And then in New Jersey, this is actually a non-starter. Our Madison Fernandez tells us there. So Democrats don't have a lot of good cards to play in response to Republicans. So I talked to a Republican consultant close to the White House about all of this and whether they really needed to do this redistricting to win the midterms or to at least stave off losses. And this person told me that, quote, if we are relying on redistricting to hold the majorities, we have a bigger issue. And said, of course, Democrats are doing it, so we're giving them a dose of their own medicine. But they really don't see this as pivotal to preventing midterm losses as Trump himself does.
That's interesting. And so much of this is filtered through the prism of what is on Trump's mind and the experience of having lost the majorities in his first term and what ensued afterwards, which you saw him get impeached twice. You saw all sorts of investigations and oversight inquiries into his administration. And he would very much like to avoid that in his final 2 years in public office.
That's exactly right. The second story to keep an eye on today is Gaza, where, amid the starvation crisis, Trump indicated that the U.S. and Israel would work on a new system to distribute food aid. Details are scarce at this hour, but the U.S. will reportedly contribute $60 million. And the third big story for your radar today is the economy. At 8:30 a.m., we'll get the release of second quarter GDP numbers. And then at 2:30 this afternoon, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell will make an announcement on interest rates. And experts are not expecting him to announce a rate cut today.
Which I'm sure will frustrate President Trump.
That's right. The economy is going to loom large the closer that we get to Friday's August 1st deadline. Of course, when the new tariffs will hit U.S. trading partners unless they reach deals with the Trump administration. So Zack, the president of the United States, coming back home for his first full day back stateside after his trip to Scotland with a lot going on.
A ton going on, and there's a lot to nail down. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is saying that there are so many particulars to be worked out on the U.S.-EU deal, the outlines of which were announced while Trump was in Scotland. We still have talk ongoing between the U.S. and China as they try and sort out what their tariff situation is. And of course, other nations are going to do what they can to try and get a deal in before Friday, at which point major tariffs will kick in.
Certainly something we'll be watching, and we'll have more for you throughout the week. Well, as always, we try to end the show with something from the Playbook newsletter. On this date, in 1965, President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed Medicare and Medicaid into law, with former President Harry Truman by his side, and Truman and his wife Bess became Medicare's first enrollees. So happy birthday, Medicare and Medicaid. Zack, speaking of LBJ, do you think that we're going to get this latest Caro book soon, or are you?
I think we're more likely to get it than we are to get the next George R.R. Martin book. You know, that's where I have it. Robert Caro, for those of you who haven't partaken in his books, is a delight to read. And as someone who tends to go long in his own writing, I admire his willingness to go long. I believe the anecdote I heard about his book, The Power Broker, his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, was that he had 350,000 words cut from it, which is remarkable when you consider how long it is.
Well, Mr. Caro, if you're listening, we're waiting, and we're eager to read the next installment. As always, send us your tips, birthdays, or spotted moments to playbook@politico.com. Zack, thanks so much for filling in for Dasha.
My pleasure.
And that's all for today's show, but we have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook.